Knott's Berry Farm is one of the oldest theme parks in the world, opening way back in 1940 in Buena Park, California, but not really getting any major roller coasters until the 1970s. The park was originally an actual farm that grew boysenberries and eventually added a really good fried chicken restaurant that is still there to this day. Eventually, the restaurant got to be so popular that the family added a small western town next to it, calling it Ghost Town, where many of the park's current attractions are in modern day. The park then became a full on amusement park in the 1970s when many other parks began to pop up in response to the success of Disneyland. The park today is operated by Six Flags after being operated by Cedar Fair for almost the past 30 years. It's much more in line with a standard amusement park these days, but there's still some solid Western theming throughout the park that call back to its roots. It's a very landlocked park due to the location being surrounded by neighborhoods, and this makes it hard for expansion or adding new rides. There was even a rumor of a Giga or at least a Hyper roller coaster coming here, but that was shot down due to the surrounding neighborhoods worried about the noise that it would create. The park currently has 9 operating roller coasters, with Montezuma's Revenge currently being in a state of limbo, where it should have been refurbished by now, but not much work has been done on the attraction throughout the past year, so its future is uncertain. There's a bunch of other unique attractions throughout the park, including Timber Mountain Log Ride and Knott's Berry Tales. We'll start off this tour of the park with the Ghost Town section. This area pretty much takes up the majority of the left side of the park and is a bunch of Wild West themed buildings and rides, including probably the best ride in the park, Ghost Ride. This CCI wooden coaster looks amazing and was sadly closed when I visited, but I've heard great things about this massive wooden coaster. There's also a River Rapids ride that was just recently rethemed, and a nice big train that takes you around the whole park that even has fake robbers that try and rob the train during your ride, much like Silver Dollar City's train. This section especially reminds me of that park, even including a blacksmith shop and other various little stores that look like they're from the 1800s. I think Silver Dollar City is an overall much better park, but it's nice that this area is so well themed to the Wild West without even having that many rides. As you go past the River Rapids, you pass under the Park Zamperla steeplechase coaster, Pony Express. Once again, this was also not open during my visit, but I wasn't too disappointed since this ride is quite literally 20 seconds long. It does look like a decent enough family coaster though, and I'd love to see something similar come to Kentucky Kingdom and be themed around the Kentucky Derby. You then reach the back of the park called Charleston Circle with some more modern shops and restaurants. The section also has the park's newly rethemed Shooting Dark ride, Knott's Berry Tales, which is genuinely pretty fun and has similar guns to Toy Story Mania. You can then go back towards the front of the park through Calico Circle, which is honestly very similar to Ghost Town, and you really can't tell it's a different area. This is where the actual station for the train is, as well as the park's B&M invert, Silver Bullet. That actually was open during my visit, and you can hear my exact thoughts on it in my review of the coaster on my channel. There's also a horse-drawn carriage in this area that takes you around Fiesta Village and Camp Snoopy, and something extremely unique for this park, but be warned, it had one of the longest and slowest lines in the entire park. This section also has the Calico Mine Ride, another classic dark ride in the park, which I would have loved to do, but it was also not open during my visit. Thankfully, the Timber Mountain Log Ride was open and is right across from the Mine Ride. This is probably my favorite log flume I've been on and was the inspiration for Splash Mountain at nearby Disneyland. It has also heavily inspired the log ride at Mall of America, which I just rode in January, which is of similar quality. It has a bunch of animatronics, a couple decent drops, and a few dark ride scenes which I wasn't expecting. This then leads us into the Boardwalk, which has some of the biggest roller coasters in the park. These include my favorites in the whole park, Hang Time and Accelerate. Hang Time is the newest major roller coaster at the park, and one of the few Gerstlauer Infinity coasters in the US. It's easily my favorite Gerstlauer I've been on, despite its short layout, and has some great airtime moments mixed in with its 6 inversions. Accelerator is one of the last remaining Intamin hydraulic launch coasters in the world, and given Six Flags' recent track record, I'm not sure how many more years it's going to be open. Either way, it's still a fantastic ride with some of the best launches in the world, right out of the station up a massive 200-foot top hat. This section Also has some classic flat rides and a really janky wild mouse called Coast Rider. There's also the tallest attractions in the park here too, with the giant observation tower and a drop tower which is kind of average. You can then venture into Fiesta Village, which also has some recent theming upgrades. This area has the Park Zier Tivoli coaster Jaguar that as you go through a Mayan temple to enter the ride. This is also where Montezuma's Revenge should be, but no one really knows if that's ever actually going to be refurbished and open again. There's also a bunch of other bigger flat rides here, including La Revolution and Soul Spin. Finally, there's the park's kiddie section, Camp Snoopy, which also has a couple of small roller coasters. The newly opened Snoopy's Tender Paw Twister coaster wasn't quite open when I went, but it looks like a fun kiddie coaster that even has a launch. There's also Sierra Sidewinder, a mock spinning coaster, which actually is really fun and kind of intense too if you get it to really spin. Overall, this park is a fun but honestly pretty flawed park. On the surface, it kind of seems like a West Coast version of Silver Dollar City, but it's not even close to that quality. It is some of the bones of a really good park with its solid coaster and ride collection and a decent amount of theming, especially in Ghost Town. But especially in the last few decades, the park has strayed away from theming in favor of getting a lot of big coasters with little to no theming like Accelerator and Hangtime. Those are great rides, don't get me wrong, but compared to the Ghost Town section of the park, the boardwalk feels like a straight-up Six Flags park. Operationally, the park isn't great either. If you didn't notice throughout this review, many of the park's bigger rides were closed during my visit in the middle of May, and the rides that were open had some very slow-moving lines. Thankfully, it wasn't very crowded the day I went, so I was able to get on everything that was open, but it was very disappointing to not get on Ghost Rider especially. It seemed like that ride in particular was closed for the better part of May, so it wasn't really like I went on a bad day where it was shut down for just that day. In comparison to other Legacy Cedar Fair parks, it's not even close to Kings Island, and I would even say I like Worlds of Fun better, since at least most rides were open at that park, and the park seemed a lot nicer too overall in terms of how the park looked. I would still definitely be willing to come back here, especially since I missed so much, but I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, that's for sure. Be sure to check out my Knott's Berry Farm coaster reviews and be on the lookout for more theme park content in the near future.